Welcome to the Explainer. So, if you've ever spent hours, literally hours, writing the perfect automation script only to have it completely shatter the next morning just because a developer changed a single line of code, yeah, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to set the stage to completely solve that absolute nightmare of flaky automation tests. We're mastering Playwright Locators and getting to the bottom of the true hierarchy of resilience.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever actually asked yourself what happens when your DOM changes mid-test? It is a massive, massive pain point. Traditional testing tools, they rely on these brittle selectors that just completely break the second a UI updates or a framework re-renders a component. But Playwright, it handles this entirely differently.
Right, so to fix that flakiness, we first got to understand our main tool. A locator is the absolute central piece of Playwright's auto-weighting and retriability architecture. It's not just a basic string, It represents a dedicated way to find elements on the page at any given moment. Basically, what this means is that it resolves to a fresh DOM element right before every single action you take, so it handles all those dynamic framework re-renders automatically. And that brings us to Chapter 1, the core of auto-weighting.
Okay, it's absolutely crucial to fundamentally shift how you think about querying elements. Locators aren't just static queries that fire once and immediately go stale. Think of them as a continuous, dynamic philosophy. Every time a locator is used for an action, like say a click or a fill, an up-to-date DOM element is located right there in the page. If the DOM changes between calls because of a React or Angular re-render, no problem. The new element corresponding to the locator is automatically used. Because locators run this auto-weighting process prior to every single action, they are essentially the heartbeat of Playwright's incredible stability.
Which leads us to Chapter 2, Think like a user. So, if we know how locators operate under the hood, how should we actually write them? Well, we need to frame our locators entirely from the perspective of how a human being or a screen reader actually perceives the page right in front of them. Now, what's really interesting is how clearly this maps out our toolkit. These are Playwright's recommended built-in methods. GetByRole is your absolute gold standard for interactive elements. Then you've got GetByLabel for form controls, GetByPlaceholder for inputs without labels, GetByText for non-interactive things like paragraphs or divs, GetByAltText for images, and finally GetByTitle for elements using title attributes. Seriously, lock this mental map in your head for your daily coding tasks.
Let's drill down a bit into that S-tier locator, GetByRole. This is literally the best way to locate elements because it reflects exactly how users and assistive technologies interact with your app. You're targeting implicit area roles like buttons or headings and pairing them with accessible names to pinpoint the exact element. For example, looking for a button named Sign In. Now, just a quick aside, keep in mind that while this is incredible for simulating user behavior, it definitely doesn't replace a dedicated, full accessibility audit.
But, we don't live in a perfect world. That takes us to Chapter 3, Fallbacks and Brittle Villains. The reality is, not every element is perfectly accessible, meaning sometimes we have to step down from the ideal user-facing locators into the realm of explicit testing contracts and, unfortunately, some very dangerous practices. Just look at the sharp juxtaposition here. On the left, we have a resilient user-facing locator looking for a button named Sign In. It really doesn't matter where it is on the page, the test is going to find it. But on the right, a super fragile CSS chain looking for the second child in a list within a navbar. The exact second a designer adds a new item to that list, boom, your test shatters. Consider this a stark warning against the real villains of UI stability, XPath and CSS selectors. Because they are intimately tied to the DOM structure and the underlying implementation, they are absolutely going to break when the DOM changes. You should avoid using them unless it is absolutely strictly necessary. Really try to stick to how the user actually perceives the page instead.
So, you might be wondering, if you can't use a user-facing attribute, and you really shouldn't use CSS, what do? Well, you use GetByTestID. QA and developers can define explicit testing contracts using a data test ID attribute. It's highly resilient because even if the text or the role changes completely, the test still passes. You can even customize the attribute name in your config using selectors.setTestID attribute. Just remember, it is technically a fallback because it's not actually simulating a user's perception of the page.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Chapter 4, Advanced Filtering in Lists.
So real-world applications aren't just simple little buttons, right? They're dynamic lists, complex grids, deeply nested product cards. Think about how a human actually finds an item in a list. They look at all the items, they find the one with the right name, and then they look for the button right next to it. We can chain locators to do exactly that. You grab the list items, you filter down to the one that has the text product to, and then within that specific product card, you locate the Add to Cart button. Boom. No brittle index numbers required at all.
To pull that off, Playwright gives you some incredibly powerful filter options. You can filter by whether an element has certain text, or specifically has not got certain text. You can even filter based on whether a parent element has or has not got specific child locator inside it. The crucial thing to remember here, though, is that filtering is always relative to the original locator match, not the document root.
Beyond filtering, we have locator operators. You can use .and to match two locators simultaneously. Chaining narrows your search, like finding a save button only inside a specific dialog box. But my absolute favorite is .or. This is brilliant for those moments when you expect, say, a new email button, but the app might randomly throw up a security settings dialog instead. You can wait for either one and just act accordingly.
And speaking of things that can pop up and surprise you, did you know that Playwright Locators pierce right through Shadow DOM by default? It's true. Custom web components and shadow roots are notoriously frustrating in pretty much all other frameworks, but Playwright removes the headache almost entirely. The only exceptions are if you're using XPath, which, as we already know, we should avoid entirely, or if you have closed-mode shadow roots.
Now, for our final chapter. Chapter 5, the strictness rule.
We've talked a lot about finding elements, but what happens when you find too many? A lot of beginners see strict mode as this huge annoyance, but you'll quickly find it's actually a protective superpower. So, the crucial point is this. Locators are strict. If you perform an operation on a locator that targets a single DOM element, and Playwright finds more than one matching element on the page, it will instantly throw a strictness violation exception. This is entirely by design. It stops your test dead in its tracks, rather than letting it accidentally click the wrong, hidden, or duplicate button.
Now, because strictness errors can admittedly be a bit annoying, you might be tempted to force Playwright to just pick the first one it finds. You can technically opt out of strictness using locator.first, locator.last, or locator.nth. But let me be perfectly, absolutely clear. This is not recommended. It's a highly, highly dangerous habit. The exact moment your UI changes and a new element appears above your target, your test is going to confidently click the wrong thing without you ever even knowing.
Which leaves us with this final, really important thought to take back to your codebase. Are you relying way too much on locator.first instead of writing truly strict, resilient tests? I want to challenge you to review your test suite today. Get in there, strip out those brittle CSS selectors, remove those dangerous .first methods, and start relying on user-facing, strictly filtered locators. Your future self is definitely going to thank you when your tests pass on the first try. Thanks for exploring this topic with me.